Well, hello from me and the alien to Year 5 at Stoborough Primary School. And thank you very much to your teacher, Jamie Patrick, for sending through your questions. And we've got a nice little Q&A for me and the alien today. So some fun questions to start with. And Charlie asks, what's the alien's name? Well, that's a great question, Charlie, and thanks for asking. And the alien does have a name on its own planet, but not a name that the alien could possibly pronounce in a way that humans could understand it. So it effectively doesn't have a name, but you're welcome to give the alien your own name if you wish to give the alien a name. But one of the good things about us not knowing the alien's name is that it means that it can be more of a kind of universal alien. So it can help us to think about environmental issues from the perspective of any alien without being too specific about which particular alien we're actually talking to and explaining our world to. So it's a kind of generic alien. It could be from anywhere in the universe. And Brady asks, how many brains does the alien have? That's a great question, Brady. The alien and I telepathically communicate. We communicate using telepathy from its brain to mine. But the alien's telling me now that it doesn't really have one brain in the sense that humans have one brain in our heads. The alien's brain is it's saying to me, sort of distributed all over its body. So it's like it's one giant brain. Right? And it's such a show off, this alien. It's just saying it's one big brain, you know. So I hope that answers your question, Brady. Right, on to the environmental questions. So Ruben asks, what positive effect is the coronavirus having on the environment? Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think one of the positive impacts of the coronavirus is having on the environment that we've noticed so far is that we're all traveling a lot less. So that means that the air pollution in and around our cities is a lot less. And also globally, that means that the carbon emissions that cause climate change and global warming, they're all reducing at the moment. So that's one sort of short-term immediate benefit, if you like, if we are looking for benefits and silver linings in this very difficult situation. But the other longer-term impact, I think, is positive on the environment from the indirect results of the coronavirus, is that it's going to be very difficult in future for governments to say that they don't want to be led by science. Because as we've heard in the news recently, governments and politicians are saying all the time we want to be led by the science, unite by the science, and that same concept goes from coronavirus that can be transferred over to climate change. And it's going to be a very brave politician that stands up in future and says that they don't want to be led by science because everything they've been saying has been led by science in terms of coronavirus. So I think that's actually the most positive impact that we've got so far from the coronavirus. And next question, Henry asks, what impact is the coronavirus having on our wildlife? So that's a great question, Henry. Thanks very much for that. Well, one of the impacts of coronavirus on wildlife is that we're all staying in a lot more. And that means that the wildlife is getting a bit braver, it's getting a bit more adventurous, it's coming out and exploring our towns and cities, which are normally very busy, particularly in the centre of our towns and cities. And one example of that happened to me recently, I was going to the shops and I came back home and the alien had noticed that there was some bird poo on my shopping bag. And the alien found that the funniest thing that it has seen in the whole universe for the last 23,000 years. So this alien here was laughing at me about that for 4 hours. 4 hours it was laughing at me for having bird poo on my shopping bag. And that was a result of all the wildlife and all the birds coming into our towns and cities, having a look around and finding more places to build nests and find food in our towns and cities. But it did mean that I was pooed on by not just a seagull, I have to say. It wasn't just like your average seagull. It was my favourite bird, the peregrine falcon, my favourite bird. And the alien was laughing at me about that for about 4 hours. Mary asks, if the planet warms up too much, will we have our native species anymore? And also asks, will animals adapt to the changes? And what will happen to deserts if the temperature increases? So thank you, Mary. There's 3 questions there, sort of all related. So firstly, if the planet warms up too much, will we have our native species anymore? Well, what happens when the planet warms up is that the vegetation changes, and therefore the animals that use that vegetation also changes. So what happens is that as the planet warms, the vegetation and therefore the animals need to move further north. Certain animals and species like beetles and certain flowering plants either need to move further north, say in Europe, for example, stork birds have been moving further and further north, and now there's more efforts to get them back into the south of England. But what will happen, of course, is that eventually there won't be any further north that they can go. And that's when we're at a real risk of losing our species. And similarly, on mountainsides, for example, every few years we've noticed that certain species need to move further and further up the mountains as the planet warms. And again, eventually they're just going to get to the top of the mountains and they're not going to have any further north to go or further up the mountains to go. And actually the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has estimated that we're going to lose about a third of our species if global warming continues at the current rate. Because a lot of species can adapt, and the more adaptable the species, the better. That's great for those species. But some species have limited powers of dispersal, which means that they can't just move north. You know, they're the ones that creep and crawl along the ground, the toads, the frogs, some of the amphibians and reptiles. They can't just fly north or go further up a mountain. A lot of species are very sensitive to climate change, and globally that means we're expecting about a third of our species globally to be lost if we don't control climate change. So hopefully that answers your second question as well, Mary, about the adaptability of animals. And the other question about deserts, well, that's a really interesting question, Mary. So one of the things about deserts in terms of climate change, what will happen to deserts if the temperature increases? Well, they'll simply get larger. So if we look at the largest desert on the planet, which is the Sahara Desert, that's about the same land area as the United States of America already, and it's growing every year. And what will happen is that at the edges of the Sahara Desert, as the temperature increases, the crops and the villages on the edges will no longer be viable, and they'll become part of the desert as well. And so that Sahara Desert and all the other deserts around the world will continue to get larger and larger as the temperatures increase. Leah asks, is all the recycling helping our planet? Thank you, Leah. That's a great question. Well, the short answer is yes. The recycling is helping the planet, and we'll explain a little bit about why. So what happens? So for example, when you go to a recycling plant, when you put something in the recycling and it gets to a recycling plant, it first of all gets sorted into all the different materials. So they use magnets and cameras and all the different sorting mechanisms to get all the different materials in the right place in that recycling plant. And then what happens is, for example, with an aluminium can, for example, the amount of energy it takes to make one new renewable so the amount of energy it takes to make one new aluminium can from materials from the ground is the equivalent of recycling 20 aluminium cans. So it's not just the saving of the materials themselves and less need for mines and that kind of thing, but also the energy production, the energy use is much greater. So actually recycling helps global warming. It's not just about the resources, it's also about the energy. And recycling helps to save a lot of energy, basically. And similarly, the other thing that a lot of people sort of forget in terms of plastics and the issues around plastic is that plastic is made from oil. It's literally made from oil. So the more recycling we do of plastic, the less oil we need from the ground. And with just 1 ton of recycled plastic, that saves 16 barrels of oil from the ground. And oh, we've got an alien intervention here. The alien is saying to me telepathically that we need to remember on our planet that our planet is a finite size. And actually, this alien here, by the way, is 1 billion years old. And it's saying to me telepathically that if us humans want to stay on our planet for another 1,000,000 years or even 1,000,000,000 years, eventually we're going to have to recycle absolutely everything, because our planet is limited. It's one ball. Hopefully you can see the globe here. It's a limited size ball, and if we're going to be around for 1,000,000 years, 1 billion years, you know, there's no more material going into our planet, and we will have to recycle absolutely everything, 100% in the long term, in the real long term. Okay, so the next question is from Lola. Will the environment get better? Well, that's a big question. Thanks very much for asking that. So the first question is, can the environment get better? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, the environment can get better. I kind of think of the environment and humanity as if we are falling out of a plane. We're doing a skydive and we've got a parachute on our back, and we're falling out of a plane. And the question is, can we pull the parachute cord? And of course, yes, we can. The parachute's right there. We can pull the cord any time we like. And that's what most skydivers do, of course. They pull the cord and they're saved and everything's fine. And the parachute, of course, is a metaphor for governmental action on climate change and on the ecological crises that we have. And we can pull the parachute cord, but your question is, will we pull the parachute cord? And I think that's a big question. And again, I hope that the coronavirus is showing that the governments can take sudden action, so they can suddenly pull that cord and they can suddenly make big changes. We're now all suddenly at home, we're suddenly traveling a lot less, and it's proven that the governments can make sudden big changes. And will the environment get better? Well, it does depend on whether the governments take charge and pull that parachute cord and help us all to make and enforce those big changes that we need to make to stop global warming continuing. And Florence S. asks, how many years do you think we have to save the Earth? The best people to answer this question is, of course, the scientists who are working directly for organisations like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And what the IPCC have done is they've brought together all the results of thousands of scientists all around the world. So it's not just one person's opinion, it's thousands and thousands of highly qualified scientists. And together they have assessed that we have until the year 2030 to really make sure that we get global warming under control. And of course, they made that assessment in 2018. It's now already 2020. So that means that we've got 10 years left to bring global warming under control. And Charlie asks, what will the Earth look like in 500 years' time? Well, the alien is particularly pleased by this question because it has already promised me that it will come back to visit the Earth in a few hundred years' time. So it's agreeing, yes, 500 years is about a good amount of time to come back and visit. And the key question that the alien is asking me telepathically is, what will the shape of our continents look like? Because to answer your question, what will the Earth look like in 500 years' time? Well, that depends on sea level rise. And at the moment, with current projections of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, we think that the sea level is going to rise 0.2 metres by the year 2100. But of course, by the year 2520, the sea level rise could be a lot more. And if we haven't controlled global warming, then the sea level rise could be 2 metres, it could even be 7 metres by that point if we don't control climate change. And what a 7 metre rise in climate change will mean is that the shape of our continents will look very different. So we hear a lot about kind of coastal areas being flooded, but that's not just areas like Bangladesh and Florida. That's huge areas of the Earth's continents having to be redrawn. And the alien's worried here. The alien's actually worried that it won't recognise the Earth because it'll be flying around trying to find the right planet, and it'll be remembering what the continents look like in 2020, and it'll think it's not the same planet. So we have to be careful that the alien won't get lost and it'll actually be able to find us again in 500 years' time. So, final question from Joseph. Could your book change the world? Well, that's what the alien and I are hoping for. So our book is a write-up of our tour around the world in 2019. Last year, we went to 10 places around the world to give the alien a sense of the key issues facing our planet. And I think the main way that our book could change the world is helping humans to think differently. So helping humans to think from an alien perspective, because the truth is that for the last few decades, the last sort of 100 years or so, we've been thinking from a human perspective and it hasn't worked. We've got into lots of difficulties and lots of problems when we think from our own human perspective. And what the alien is trying to do here by visiting us and helping to communicate the issues and the ways that it's thinking is to help us humans to think from a completely different perspective. So for example, on the aliens planet, when issues of climate change came up, they just handed over all those decisions straight over to the scientists, and the scientists sorted it out. And the alien finds it quite amusing. It kind of keeps laughing at me about humanity, that politicians are making decisions about climate change and how we produce energy and that kind of thing. And the alien thinks it's hilarious. You know, on their planet, they just give those kind of decisions straight over to the scientists. And the scientists say, we need to produce energy this way and that way, and then politicians do it. So thinking from an alien perspective is the main contribution and the main way that we think our book can change the world. So the final message from the alien and me is to Stoborough Primary School Year 5 is to think like an alien. So thank you very much and bye.